Okay, in this section 7-5, we are going to be continuing with our lessons on factoring. This will be our third one. And what we start with is some guidelines. Once again, we kind of review the guidelines for finding the greatest common factor. Once again, look at the coefficients, the regular numbers first. Variable must be in common to all terms. So if one, you're going to factor out an x, all terms must have an x. If a variable is common to all terms, take the one with the smallest exponent and then divide all terms by the greatest common factor and get the remainder in parentheses. Alright, so now in this section, okay, what we're going to be looking at is factoring a trinomial, but the leading coefficient of the x squared term is not going to be 1 this time. Alright, so when that's the case, okay, if you just went and straight drew in your product of two binomials and tried to fill in the blanks, okay, the first two blanks wouldn't be x and x anymore. And that's where the difficulty comes in. So there would be several different things that you could put in for those first two blanks to get 4x squared. For example, it could be 2x and 2x, or it could be 4x and x. Both of those products would give you 4x squared. And then so you would almost have to have two different sets going and try each one to see which one works. Okay? Although it could work and you could get the answer there eventually, there is a more efficient method that kind of eliminates the possibility of having multiple ways you could fill in those first two blanks, and that's really called a method called the AC method, which allows us to factor by grouping. So here's how it works. You want to identify the values of A and C and multiply those two numbers together. Remember, A is the number in front of the x squared and C is this number. So I want to multiply A times C. So my A is 4, my C is 9, and I want to multiply those two numbers together. Well, 4 times 9 gives me 36. Alright, now here's how it works. What we want now is we want two numbers that multiply together to give us 36, okay? But at the same time they can combine together to give me a positive 15 in the middle. So I need to think about two numbers that can multiply together to get me 36. But at the same time, their sum is going to be 15. Well, I can start with these two. 4 times 9 is 36, all right? But 4 plus 9 is 13, not 15. So I'm going to need two other numbers. So let's keep thinking about what times what equals 36. 6 times 6 is 36, but 6 plus 6 once again is 12. Not going to work. Let's keep going. What about 12 and 3? 12 times 3 is 36, and 12 plus 3 is 15. All right, so those are the two numbers that I need. Now, here's how it works. Once you identify the two numbers that multiply to get 36, but add up to 15x, you're going to split this term into those two numbers. So in other words, I'm going to rewrite 15x as 12x plus 3x, because remember 12 times 3 is 36 and 12 plus 3 equals to 15. So I'm going to rewrite this, but I'm going to split up this middle term, this 15x. So it's going to look like this. 4x squared is going to be the same. Now, instead of writing 15x, I'm going to write it as 12x plus 3x. 15x equals 12x plus 3x. I'm just splitting the 15 up into these two factors that I came up with that multiply together to get 36 but add up to 15. Alright, so they need to multiply, these two numbers need to multiply together to get 36. But of course they have to add up to this in order to be able to split that middle term apart. Don't forget you have a plus 9 on the end of this. So there's my first step. So again, what did I do? I found two numbers that multiply together to get 36 and at the same time add up to 15. Those two numbers are 12 and 13. That allows me to split the 15x into 12x plus 3x. All right? Now, how does that help me? What I can do at this point is I can employ a method that's called factor by grouping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to group the first two terms together and I'm going to group the last two terms together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor those individually. So what I want to do now is I want to factor this 4x squared plus 12x. 4 and 12, the biggest thing that I can pull out of there is 4. And out of x squared and x, I can pull an x out of there. Alright, so just like we did in our last lesson, I'm pulling out a 4x from this. Well, what's the result? When I divide that out, I'm left with x. 4x squared divided by 4x, the 4's cancel, x squared divided by x is x. My sign is plus. Alright, 12 divided by 4 is going to leave me with 3. And then the x cancels. So when I factor that out, pull a 4x out of these two, I'm left with x plus 3 in the parentheses. Now I'm going to slide over and factor the next two terms. So what can I pull out of a 3x plus 9? 3 and 9, I can pull a 3 out of there, and it's a positive 3, so go ahead and put your plus right here. Plus 3. There's no x here, so I can't pull out any x. So 3 divided by 3 is gone. X plus 3, 9 divided by 3 is 3. Okay? So what have I done up to this point now? In this step, I have pulled out and factored each one of these groups of two terms together. So I factored a 4x out of these two, and I factored a 3 out of these two. Now, here's the final step. What you want when you factor these two sets of terms that you've grouped together is you want the parentheses to be the same. If the parentheses are exactly the same, these two sets of parentheses are exactly the same, they can be actually factored out of this full expression. So like, in other words, think of the parentheses as a y, like 4xy plus 3y. Well, I could pull a y divided out of both of these and then write this expression like this. So I'm going to pull an x plus 3 out of both of these terms. So I'm going to have an x plus 3 that I pull out of both of these terms. Now when I do that and divide it out, what's left in the parentheses? Well, x plus 3 divided by x plus 3 is gone, and I'm left with a 4x. And here, x plus 3 divided by x plus 3 is gone, and I'm left with a plus 3. And that is the fully factored answer for this expression. Okay? So, really this factoring by grouping and using this AC method allows us to get this factoring without having to guess at what those first two blanks would have to be. And as long as when I factor this, these two sets of parentheses are exactly the same, I'll be able to pull that out as a factor, and whatever's not in the parentheses will end up here in this set of parentheses. 4x plus 3 is left here when I pull those out of there. Alright? So that's kind of how it works. And when you use this A times C method and then split that middle term up, it's going to work like this every time, where the parentheses are going to match, all right, if we factor it correctly. Okay? So that's kind of how it works, and like I say, it does save you some time in the long run, as opposed to just writing down these two sets of parentheses and trying to guess at these two numbers from the beginning, because in this case, there's really only two that could work. It's either 2x times 2x or x times 4x. But you have cases where there could be 3 different things that work, or 4, or sometimes even more. And that's where it gets really tough to just do it by that guess and check method. So the AC method comes in a lot more handy here as far as coming up with the answer. Now, like I say, it may seem like a lot doing this first example, but once we do several of these, just like with anything else, the more practice you get, the easier it becomes. All right, so let's try the next one. So again, we want to multiply A times C. So I want to do 5 times 12. And 5 times 12 gives me 60. So I'm looking for two numbers to multiply together to get 60, but at the same time, they add up to 19. Can we start with these two? What's 12 plus 5? That is going to be 17, so that's not going to work. We're going to have to come up with something else. What else multiplies together to get 60? What about 10 and 6? Does 10 plus 6 equals 19? Nope, not going to work. Let's see, what else can we get? Maybe 15 times 4. 15 times 4 is 60. And let's see, 15 plus 4 is 19, so that's what I want. So now I'm going to split this middle term up into 15x plus 4x. It'll look like this. 5x squared plus, we said 15x plus 4x, and then we got a plus 12 on the back of this. Now remember, the reason why I do this is because I can now group those two sets of terms together and factor them. So what can I factor out of these first two terms? Looks like I can factor out a 5x in common, and divided by 5x here would leave me with just an x, and there's a plus for my sign, and 15 divided by 5 is going to make 3. The x's cancel, so that's just going to be x plus 3. Now here I can pull out a 4, so that's going to be a plus 4, and we're going to have x plus 3, and notice the parentheses match. That's what I want, because now I can pull in my next step the x plus 3 out of there. X plus 3, close it off, and in parentheses 5x plus 4 is left, and there's your answer. If you wanted to double check and make sure you could, x times 5x is 5x squared. The last two, 3 times 4 is 12, and in the middle 3 times 5x is 15x. Plus 4 times x is 4x, 15x plus 4x is 19 in the middle, and we have factored it correctly. All right, a few more examples for us to look at here. Remember, we start with a times c, which is 5 times 9, and 5 times 9 is 45. So I need two numbers to multiply together to get 45, but at the same time, okay, they're going to add up to negative 18. So at the same time, they're going to add up to a negative 18. And so let's think about two numbers that multiply together to get 45. So obviously, when this number here is positive, the AC, and the number in the middle there is negative, then both of my middle terms are going to be negative. So if I was thinking that 5 and 9 was going to be it, then negative 5 minus 9, do they subtract together to make 18? No, they don't. It's negative 14, so that's not going to work. So we need something else. What else equals 45? We tried 5 and 9. What about 15 times 3? All right, so 15 times 3 is 45. And since I need that negative in the middle, it's going to be negative 15 times negative 3. So negative and negative makes a positive, but negative 15 minus 3 is negative 18 in the middle. That's what I want, so I'll write my term with that middle term rewritten, or I'll write my expression with the middle term rewritten. So it's 5 squared. Remember, I'm breaking negative 18 down into negative 15x minus 3x, and then I have a plus 9 behind it. So remember, I've broken this down negative 18 into negative 5x minus 3x, but remember, negative 15 times negative 3 equals positive 45. So we're in good shape there. Now I'm ready to group these two together. And so when we do that, I can pull a 5x out of the first one. So factor that out. What's left in the parentheses? Divide out. That'll be x. And then I have a minus for my sign, negative divided by a positive. 15 divided by 5 is 3, and we'll leave it there. And so let me see, what else do we have here? So on this next one, all right, so a negative 3x plus 9, I can pull a negative 3 out of there. So when this term is negative, I can pull the negative out of there, so it's going to be negative 3. And because remember, we want these to match. So in the parentheses, this is going to have to be positive, and it will be, because negative 3 divided by negative 3 is positive 1, which is just x. I'll leave my x there. And then positive divided by a negative is a negative. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And notice, remember, the main thing that you want to happen after you factor this out is these parentheses to match. And they do, because now I can factor that x minus 3 out of there. And it'll look like this, x minus 3, close it off, and then in the parentheses that's left is 5x minus 3, and we've got it. Okay. One thing I want to point out here is it doesn't matter if you write negative 15x minus 3x, or if you write negative 3x minus 15x. Like if you switch these two middle terms, it would still actually work out to be correct. Because think about it in this problem. If I move this negative 3x right here, then the only thing that I can factor out of this first one is an x, and it would be left with 5x minus 3, which notice is this, all right? And then over here, if I move this negative 15 over here, then I could factor out a 3, right, which would leave me with, again, 5x. I'd figure to factor out a negative 3, which would leave out a 5x minus 3. And then when I pull that out, instead of my parentheses being x minus 3 and x minus 3, my parentheses would now be 5x minus 3 and 5x minus 3. And these outside numbers would be x and then minus 3. So it would actually still work out to be the same thing regardless of which one of these middle terms you write in first. So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't matter which one you write first. You would actually still get the same answer. Let's try the last one now. A times C is 4 times 4, which we know is going to be 16. So I need two numbers to multiply together to get 16, but at the same time, they will combine to get negative 17 in the middle. Well, negative 4 minus 4 is negative 8, so that's not enough. But it is going to be negative 16 and negative 1, so I'll go ahead and write that in. So it'll be 4x squared minus 16x minus x, which is just a 1x, and then plus 4. All right? So that's what we've got here. And now I'm ready to do my factoring by grouping. So I'm going to put these two together, and let's factor. I can pull out a 4x here, and we've got 4x, and I open, and that's going to be x, and then that's going to be a minus, and then that's going to be a 4. We close. Let's pull a negative 1 out of here, because remember you want this number to, in the parentheses, to match this, so it's got to be a positive x, so we're going to pull a minus 1 out of there. And when we do, negative and negative makes a positive x, positive by a negative makes a negative 4, and guess what? Parentheses match exactly what we want, so I'm going to pull that out, x minus 4, and then what's left when I pull the x minus 4s out? If you're having trouble seeing it, just put your finger over those parentheses, and now you can see it's 4x minus 1. So in the parentheses, 4x minus 1 is what we'll have. And there you go. That's it. So you're now ready for your quiz.